I think by now a lot of you are seeing why I got so many requests to turn this from a mere playlist into something more organized. With all of the repetition of claims made by the fearmongers and all of the data that just kept coming out, there really does need to be more explanation of how these all go together. This one is probably going to be the longest of them because it's about the fear-mongering they do about opioids to manipulate you into turning off your rational mind so you make decisions out of fear instead of out of your intellect. One way they do that is with the very phrase, the opioid epidemic. The term epidemic refers to an outbreak of an infectious disease that spreads to a large portion of the population within just a few weeks. But it's become a buzzword for fearmongers. There's an obesity epidemic, a gun violence epidemic, a suicide epidemic, a racism epidemic, on and on and on. I recently saw a report on the C-section epidemic. I mean, really? And like the opioid epidemic, none of these can be an epidemic because none of them are infectious. And even if you want to say it's the statistical equivalent of an epidemic, well, more Americans die from the flu than die from opioids. So how is there an opioid epidemic but not a flu epidemic? It's just what politicians and pundits do these days. They go beyond just reporting the news to try and scare you into doing what they want. And it's effective. Fear-mongering works by activating the amygdala, thus stimulating the hippocampus. This causes a form of stress which bypasses rational thought. So, as I said, this is going to be a long one because there's a lot of this sort of thing. In fact, there are 4 videos from the original playlist we'll be looking at. As with the others, I've tried to edit them down to the relevant parts, but we also need to add a couple of things to flesh it all out. We'll start off with Thom Hartmann. As we covered last time, he'll be blaming Purdue Pharma, and also Rudy Giuliani, because why not, for opioid addiction and overdoses, even though, as we'll see, it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. As we've covered, people aren't getting addicted or dying from the prescription versions of these drugs, but from the illicit black market versions.
Rudy Giuliani, it turns out, is one of the guys responsible for our opioid crisis.
Seriously, Tom? You're gonna come up with a bogus way of blaming a Republican for a crisis that doesn't actually exist? Fine, let's see what you got.
I think it's 300,000 people who have died as a result of this opioid crisis.
That's only if you include overdoses from illegal opioids like heroin and fentanyl. But watch this state cult sociopath try and blame it all on prescriptions.
And guess who Purdue Pharma, back in the day, right after 9/11, when Rudy Giuliani was a hotshot lawyer, rolling along, this is after he left as mayor of New York, Purdue Pharma hired him. Great piece about this by Chris McGreal in The Guardian. He reached a deal to avoid a ban on Purdue doing business with the federal government. Now, the Medicare and Medicaid and the Veterans Administration, huge markets. And Purdue Pharma, we want to sell these narcotics. I mean, come on, we got to do this. They note the former New York mayor also secured an agreement that greatly restricted further prosecution of the pharmaceutical company and kept its senior executives out of prison.
Wow, this guy takes longer to set up his crazy conspiracy garbage than Alex Jones. At least Jones can get to a point. Hartmann just doesn't have the brain power to be a proper conspiracy crank.
He knows Purdue turned OxyContin into a multi-billion-dollar drug after its launch in 1996 with an unprecedented campaign marketing the painkiller to doctors. The demand for OxyContin quickly surged.
And over 98% of people who took it and other opioids such as hydrocodone never become addicted. According to a study from Harvard published in the British Medical Journal, opioid abuse was observed in just 0.6% of patients who were prescribed opioids following an operation.
The investigators waded through several million of Purdue's internal memos, and they found that the drug representatives were selling the drugs using false claims.
Like?
When Purdue discovered it was under investigation, they hired Giuliani. Giuliani was also working his Washington contacts. The Purdue lawyers complained to the office of the then Deputy Attorney General, James Comey, that the prosecutor, a guy by the name of Brownlee, was exceeding his legal authority in wanting documents from Purdue. And so Comey sits down with the prosecutor, Brownlee, and says, "Why are you prosecuting the chicken guy?" Right? Comey got his information from Rudy Giuliani. Well, it turns out Purdue Pharma's got nothing to do with Sonny Purdue and the chickens. It's a whole different company. And Brownlee had to explain to Comey that he'd been scammed by Rudy Giuliani. Now we're all being scammed by Rudy Giuliani.
Well, that was devoid of data and references. So how does any of this mean that Giuliani is to blame for the opioid crisis? What were these supposed false claims? Hartmann didn't even say. Here's a fact. This bogus war on pain patients goes back at least to 1997, the very next year from Hartmann's whatever. I don't really know what he was saying happened there, but I've linked to a Reason magazine story from that year about the difficulty a pain sufferer had in getting the medicine he needed to manage pain. In desperation, he went to Dr. Jack Kevorkian seeking suicide. Fortunately, Kevorkian was able to get the guy to see a pain specialist who agreed to treat him in his home. All was going well until the pharmacist told him that the doctor wasn't allowed to prescribe pain medicine anymore. The pharmacist told him to find another doctor, and he truthfully replied, "There is no other doctor." This is the reason for this so-called opioid crisis. It's completely manufactured. Pain sufferers deprived of their medication seek out suicide or illicit options on the black market just because they can't live with the constant pain they feel every single moment of every single day and know that they will for the rest of their lives. All this does is take away the only source of relief for these people. And unfeeling, supercilious sociopaths like Hartmann keep fueling it, mentioning the opioid overdoses when basically none of them happen just because people are prescribed opioids. It happens because they have addiction issues involving use of multiple drugs and psychological problems that fuel them. I'll say it again, and I don't care how many of you insult me in the comments for it. Addiction is a symptom, not a disease. And by the way, there is a negative correlation between this rise in opioid-related deaths and opioid prescriptions. According to data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and IQVIA, overdose deaths from opioids only started accelerating once opioid prescriptions started falling due to crackdown on prescriptions from the Obama administration. The crackdown did not help the problem of opioid-related deaths. It just made them worse, as prohibition always does. We also see this when we look at data across states. According to data from the CDC and the U.S. Agency for Healthcare Research Quality, there is basically no correlation between opioid prescriptions and opioid deaths. And when you look at the actual rates of mortality in the 6 worst states, you actually find an inverse correlation. The biggest increases happen in states with the lowest prescription rate. The biggest one being D.C., with a prescription rate of 32.5, but an overdose rate of 41. Close behind is Massachusetts, with a prescription rate of 47.1, but an overdose rate of 35. And that was after a serious crackdown. There were 28% fewer prescriptions in Massachusetts than there had been 10 years previously. By the way, this overdose rate of 41 per 100,000, the worst in the country if applied to all opioid patients nationwide, would only be about 20,000 deaths per year, far below the 300,000 Hartmann claimed. By the way, the real number of deaths from prescription drug overdose is about 7,000, over 40 times lower than what Hartmann claimed, and that's without excluding people who were also doing illicit drugs or had serious psychological illnesses. Over 4 times as many people die from the flu. If Hartmann had his way, millions of Americans would be sentenced to a lifetime of unbearable pain. He does not get to call libertarians, conservatives, or anyone else heartless and uncompassionate after this. It's unbelievable. People like that just have no humanity. Now let's look at another Lord Killian video, this time a response to Second Thought. What you'll see from Second Thought is the same old mindlessly regurgitated claims that are easy to debunk if you just do the research. But they don't, because the goal is not to give you information about your health. The goal is to push a political agenda, and he makes it completely 100% clear what that agenda is.
See, I know that the opioid crisis is largely a product of the marketing efforts by Purdue and the Sackler family.
No, it's because of the unscientific marketing efforts by the CDC.
And that they pushed these drugs on doctors using massive amounts of money, leading to overprescribing and to the nearly 140 opioid-related deaths a day we have here in the States.
As anyone who's done the actual research can easily see, this is an outright lie. And it's a lie that's led to unnecessary misery on the part of pain patients who are just trying to manage their pain.
You're pretty well informed about these facts.
Not if you're subscribed to his channel, you're not.
We'll be looking at how the logic of drug criminalization and the nature of capitalism's relationship to the state profoundly shaped this event.
Of course, as anyone who watches my channel knows, capitalism has no relationship to the state. If it has a relationship to the state, then it isn't capitalism, by definition.
You've probably wondered before why some drugs are legal to consume and others are not. Why is it heroin, not alcohol, that can put you behind bars?
Because when we tried that with alcohol, it was a colossal failure. We haven't learned that lesson yet with heroin, although we should have. But that's not what you'll hear from Second Thought. By the way, just for those of you who keep accusing me of portraying these people in the worst light possible, I'll point out that I'm skipping his insane conspiracy theories about coffee and tobacco being pushed on people by big corporations who want workers to be addicted to stimulants, as well as his bewildering association of them with white supremacy. You don't need me to debunk all that anyway. So yes, what you'll be seeing are his better arguments. Keep that in mind.
According to Michel Foucault,
yeah, we'll skip this crap too, but you can see what I mean. No one who takes Michel Foucault at all seriously is worth listening to.
drugs like fentanyl, a synthetic opioid that is both more potent and cheaper to produce than most other opioids, comes into the US primarily through Latin America. And the drug's comparatively easier potential for overdose has made it a target of the US's political apparatus. In targeting fentanyl in their speeches, presidents and elected politicians of all stripes are promoting a vision of a drug-free society. The idea that if we can get rid of dangerous fentanyl, we can get rid of our drug problem. But make no mistake, the real aim of these policies is to focus state protection on the pharmaceutical corporations that benefit American interests.
Anyone who knows anything about prescription opioids knows that this is just an incredible lie. In order for this to be the case, the government would have to not be putting the screws on pain patients, subjecting them to what is tantamount to torture solely for wanting to manage their pain in a safe, non-abusive way. In order for this to be the case, the government would not have psychopathically classified prescription opioids as Schedule II narcotics. If what he's saying is at all true, then how come all of his talking points about these evil pharmaceutical companies come from the government?
For companies like Purdue, this is all great news. The relative morality of pharmaceutical opioids over their illicit counterparts, and the implantation of the US as a dominant military and economic power in Latin America allows them to expand their operations away from the US, where pharmaceutical opioid consumption has been declining since 2012.
Yeah, why was pharmaceutical opioid consumption declining since then? It isn't because there were fewer pain patients, it's because that's when Obama moved prescription opioids to Schedule II, like I said, resulting in pain patients being faced with a choice of suffering with their pain, turning to the black market for pain relief, or committing suicide.
If this sounds complicated and a bit all over the place, it's because it is.
No, it's because you're trying to confuse the issue so that people will believe your crap.
If you can only remember one thing from this episode, let it be this. At the heart of this nexus of pharmaceutical, national, and geopolitical interests is the consistent persecution of the poor, of racial minorities, and of the people of foreign countries in the search of higher profits and greater global power.
See, not one word about the persecution of pain patients, because he wants pain patients to be persecuted because it suits his political agenda. He is no better than the drug warriors. In fact, he's one of them. Are you starting to get the picture? I'm linking to a more recent article from Reason covering how they abuse the statistics. Most of this is review of what we've already covered, but they do mention a 2011 study published in JAMA called Association Between Opioid Prescribing Patterns and Opioid Overdose-Related Deaths. This study is very influential among the drug warriors and is cited by many of them to illustrate the horrible dangers of opioids. It purportedly showed that patients prescribed higher levels of opioids were more likely to overdose. Here's the tactic they used. They looked at 750 Veterans Health Administration patients who got prescription opioids and later died of an overdose and compared them to over 155,000 other VHA patients who were prescribed opioids but didn't die of overdoses. That's weird, isn't it? There aren't any people in the study who weren't prescribed opiates. So how is this any real comparison? Also, could there be other reasons why those 750 people overdosed? 40% of them had been diagnosed with substance abuse disorder. 66% had a diagnosed psychiatric disorder. Those people are simply in a higher risk group for overdosing regardless of which specific drug they would overdose on. They also didn't look at the quality of life increases for the 99.96% of patients who didn't overdose. What bad things might they have done if they had to deal with pain that was inadequately treated? But more about that in part 5. Another study they like to use is one from the Annals of Internal Medicine, where they only looked at 6 patients who died of opioid overdoses. They literally had more authors than sample cases. Actually, they even had more entries in their regression table than sample cases. They claim to have controlled for smoking, depression, substance abuse, comorbidity, pain psych, age, sex, recent sedative hypnotic prescription, and recent initiation of opioid use. How do you control for 9 factors with only 6 samples? Of course, they're not trying to fearmonger to readers of medical journals. That's just the justification for taking the issue to the people. And one show that gleefully went along with it was a horrible show of medical pseudoscience called The Doctors, which I debunked in this Lord Killian video.
I am shocked that insurance companies didn't raise red flags.
Well, I'm shocked that you quacks are still on the air. Actually, no, I'm not.
Some people are pocketing profits. Some people are hemorrhaging profits.
Gotta love people who think the term profit is a dirty word. For those of you who haven't seen this show, they have a segment towards the end where they hawk a product or a line of products to sell people that they make a profit for. I guess profit is only bad when someone else is making it. By the way, according to the British Medical Journal, only about 63% of the medical claims made on the doctors had any evidence to support them at all, and when the evidence had to be believable or somewhat believable, that dropped to 50%. Might as well toss a coin. And if you require a specific benefit as well, that drops to 41%, about the same as the Dr. Oz show. They also concluded that there was no attempt to inform viewers of potential conflicts of interest, so they can come on TV and make money giving bad advice, but it's people who make pharmaceuticals that make people's lives objectively and significantly better who are the bad guys. Yeah, right.
Patients are losing in all of this.
No, patients are losing because of lies told by people like you that make it more difficult for them to get medicine that helps keep them out of pain. I was hit by a drunk driver over 10 years ago. As a result, I will be in pain every single moment of every single day for the rest of my life. By far, the most effective relief I can get is from prescription opioids. How dare they needlessly increase the suffering of patients just so they can get some attention by jumping on this latest drug warrior bandwagon?
Someone at an insurance company didn't say, wait a minute, this seems like we're paying for this way too often, way too much.
Opioids are now several times more expensive than they were before Barack Obama put them on Schedule 2. So not only is getting them like pulling eye teeth, but we have to pay more to boot.
Is that, where did your mindset come into play? And you said, you know what, I can't do this anymore and I need to go to the authorities.
Well, I couldn't sleep at night. Thinking about people like Mackenzie. I couldn't live with myself.
How about those of us who can't sleep at night because we're in pain?
It was wrong.
Why don't you let patients and their doctors make that determination?
Our healthcare system has become one that pushes pills. We all know that.
Yeah, well, as long as they're pills that work, so what?
Everyone gets rich off of it. It's ugly. It's not something we like to acknowledge.
I'll acknowledge it. People are getting rich, helping other people manage their pain. Good! Let that be an incentive for them to develop other things that help reduce people's pain as well. What good do you think you're doing and the other bandwagon jumping pundits who are trying to make your profits demonizing medicine that people need, making it harder for them to get?
McKinsey's lawyer, Michael Rainboth, joins us via Skype.
So we have filed a lawsuit on behalf of McKinsey against the not only Insys, the pharmaceutical company, but also the physician assistant who was prescribing this drug. The physician assistant.
Wow, just look at this woman's fake pretend sympathy face. Here, take a look. See? Hey, why don't you give that face for the millions of people in this country who suffer from chronic pain? Because you can't make money doing that? And hey, I wonder how much money this Rainboth ambulance chaser stands to make off all of this, 'cause it's always the lawyers that rake in the most. Not that I don't have sympathy for McKinsey, but you have to understand, no one becomes addicted because they took a pill. Addiction is not a disease. It's a symptom. There's some underlying condition driving it, whether it's some form of depression or anxiety disorder, the result of some sort of trauma, or even something like an undiagnosed epilepsy. You help the patient by treating the underlying disorder, not by suing a pharmaceutical company that had nothing to do with it, no matter how deep their pockets are.
And so the New Hampshire Board of Medicine sanctioned not only the PA, but also the supervising physician. And the physician assistant has now lost his license.
Oh, great. Wonderful. Give doctors even less of an incentive to prescribe opioids to people who need them.
You can't always trust our healthcare system.
Okay, you can't always trust our healthcare system. But in this case, you have a product that works. So let's see, who should we trust? The pharmaceutical companies who got it through some of the most stringent safety and efficacy testing in the world? Or people on a TV show who struggle to get things half right?
I'm not talking about physicians here. Most physicians want what's best.
Okay, so why were the physicians in this case sued and had their license taken away? You're giving mixed signals here.
And if you are prescribed a new pain medication, as an example, or any new medication, I think asking the question, why am I taking this medication? How long do you think I need to be on it? What's the lowest possible effective dose? And what are the alternatives?
Okay, those are good questions. How do they have anything to do with the crap you people have been slobbering this entire segment? Because if the doctor gives the patient an answer that you don't like, you'll send a lawyer to sue him and have his license taken away. Do you know what the result of all of this is? I now have to pee in a cup every 6 months to prove I'm not taking pot or heroin or whatever. You know who else has to do that? People on parole. That's right. Chronic pain sufferers in this country have been sentenced to lifetime parole for a crime we were never even charged for after never getting our day in court. All because of people like you. And by the way, every time I have to pee in a cup, they charge me $90 for the test. Yes, I have to pay for it too. How can anyone justify any of this? Thankfully, The Doctors is no longer on the air, but it ran for 14 years, misinforming the public about all sorts of medical issues, not just opioids. If you want to know how much these horrible people hate the patients they're sworn to help, here's a video of theirs I haven't covered before, but they decided to attack gabapentin. We discussed that in part 2. Gabapentin is a neural inhibitor, and it works on all sorts of neurological disorders such as epilepsy. For pain patients, it works on neuropathic pain, which can be a major portion of the pain they experience. Gabapentin means that pain patients can take fewer opioids while still managing their pain, so you'd think they'd like it. But no. Pain patients are people they can just throw under the bus to pursue their dogmatic agenda, get ratings, and hawk their own products.
All the attention has been on opioids, right, for the most part, but we uncovered a different prescription drug that is not only being abused, it's killing people.
Is an anti-seizure medication quickly becoming the new drug of abuse? It's called gabapentin.
Yeah, gabapentin is not killing people. Calm down, turn off your amygdala, engage your rational brain, and let's watch critically.
On the surface, gabapentin might appear harmless. It's easily obtainable, considered non-addictive, and an alternative to opiates for chronic pain. But we uncovered a dark side to the medication.
Ooh, a dark side. Like Darth Vader, beware the dark side, Luke.
Just last year, gabapentin was involved in over 100 overdose deaths in West Virginia.
Okay, interesting word, involved. If it had caused the deaths, they would have said caused. If it had contributed to the deaths, they would have said contributed. But no, they said involved. That really just means that gabapentin was there somehow. So someone taking gabapentin dies in a car accident. Oh no, gabapentin was involved in the car accident.
And emergency rooms have seen a 90% increase of people coming in after using the drug.
Yeah, that's called post hoc ergo propter hoc. After the fact, therefore because of the fact. It's a fallacy. More than that, it's a tactic. It's a great way to put the blame on something when you don't have any evidence. They also used something called a text bridge. People came in after using the drug. Okay, what happened in between? They took gabapentin, a whole bunch of other stuff might have happened, then they came into the emergency room for some reason. That's all they've told you. But phrasing it the way it does leaves you with the impression that gabapentin was the reason for the emergency room visit, when they didn't actually say that at all.
Is this the next drug crisis? And should doctors think twice before prescribing this medication?
No and no.
It's also used off-label a lot. As a matter of fact, the statistics show that it's actually prescribed more for off-label uses than on-label uses.
But that's most drugs. There's even a pharmacological term for it. Repositioning. The term off-label is used whenever they want to try and associate it with something sinister. But repositioning is important because it means that existing drugs can be used as a treatment for rare, neglected, and newly discovered diseases without going through the sometimes decades-long billion-dollar process to get a new drug to the market. It also means that those drugs end up being cheaper as a result. The fact that researchers found an existing generic medicine can be effective for some kinds of pain is a good thing.
I mean, is there any high or buzz?
Yes.
No.
And he said, it allowed him to not take as many opiates. But what we're seeing in the community is that drug users are realizing that gabapentin potentiates the opiate. It makes the opiate more powerful.
It makes the pain-killing aspects of the opioid more powerful. It doesn't enhance the psychotropic effects. If anything, it lessens them.
And we're seeing it being cut with heroin now.
Yeah, well, they cut a lot of stuff with heroin. They cut it with non-dairy creamer. You gonna fearmonger about that as well?
So people are combining these and they're not realizing how unbelievably dangerous it is.
Except it's not, is it? I mean, like with all drugs, there are rare side effects, but take it from someone who's been using it for years. It can be a godsend and works in ways that other medicine just doesn't. It also stays longer in your system. Take hydrocodone before bed and you're up at 4 a.m. in pain. That was me for years before I started gabapentin. But when I started taking gabapentin before bed, I started sleeping through the night for the first time in years. And that's another problem pain patients have. Pain makes it difficult to sleep, but if you can get plenty of sleep, there are all sorts of health problems you can avoid. The more things that allow for that, gabapentin, muscle relaxants like tizanidine, extended release opiates, the better. So why do they want to scare people into not taking it?
Because the Ohio Board of Pharmacy, where we know the epidemic for opiates certainly is the strongest, recently reported that in 1 month, gabapentin was prescribed as the #1 drug and 9 million more prescriptions than oxycodone.
And the withdrawal
It's just
effects are
mind-boggling.
Oh, is it? How do you know? Did you examine all 9 million patients? This is another tactic, scaring you with large numbers devoid of any context or other valuable information.
And I think what's scary is this is really a non-regulated drug.
No, it isn't. It's regulated by the FDA like all prescription drugs.
You know, it's not a regulation by the DEA in most states.
So, why should it be? Do you want to take this drug away from us as well?
And because it's generic, guys, it's very cheap.
Good!
It's very cheap
75 cents on the
75
street.
cents a
It's so cheap.
I'll tell you, we got a lot of comments from people who have used this drug.
Look, if you use any prescription drug outside the advice and supervision of a doctor, bad things might happen. But taking the experience of street users who get the drug illicitly tells you nothing about how well the drug works for people when prescribed by their doctors. And they should know this. They are doctors.
I hope that we've raised awareness for patients, for physicians. Obviously, we need to start thinking at a higher level of controlling this substance.
Oh, God, please, no. That's the last thing we need. Fortunately, this didn't seem to go anywhere, and gabapentin is still being prescribed to millions of people who need it. But you see what this is? They're doing this as an all-out attack on the quality of life of pain patients. And the big question is, why? I wish I had an answer for you. And one more for you before we end part 4. It's a segment of the podcast about how the FDA, in the name of fighting the opioid epidemic, started fearmongering about, get this, anti-diarrhea medicine. So the FDA announced that it's going to limit access to loperamide, the active ingredient of Imodium AD and other antidiarrheals, lowering the dosage, requiring blister packs, and only allowing purchases of a 2-day supply. And it's all yet another misguided effort to reduce the hideous slaughter of the non-existent opioid crisis by going after something no one is using to get high. Loperamide works only on the digestive system at regular doses, but although it isn't in any way an opioid, it can have effects on the central nervous system in high doses. Way high doses, like 5,000 times the labeled dose, which is generally 10,000 pills.
That's so hilarious, you know, when the FDA regulates all these drugs and they say, oh, because there's a chemical in it that causes people to get high, but then if you actually do the math, you would have to, eat, 10 entire packs of that drug in order to get even a mild buzz from it.
Loperamide doesn't actually reach the brain. A naturally occurring protein, P-glycoprotein, keeps the drug out of the brain. The extremely high negadoses are required to overwhelm this protein so it can't keep it all out. According to Gizmodo, there's no official data as to how many people are abusing loperamide. Gee, imagine that.
This is the government, though. They don't care.
But there are some reports of people getting high by putting thousands of loperamide tablets into a blender and making a smoothie. Several orders of magnitude less than the reports of people eating Tide Pods, but hey, why let science and the rejection of anecdotal reports get in the way of a good scare?
Yeah, I have no idea why people are eating Tide Pods.
They're really not. I mean, it's one of those things that everyone knows someone who did it, but you can't actually find any cases of someone actually doing it.
Yeah, well, still, I saw a funny joke one time because there were a few videos of people trying to eat Tide Pods and all that, and one person said, let's do a test. Let's all gargle potassium cyanide, and whoever can go the longest without dying gets $200.
There was one that it was done of a cooking show, it's like how to prepare your Tide Pods before eating, and he was making things like a Clorox garnish and things like that.
Yeah.
With sauce put over the top of it. Clinical toxicologist William Eggleston said, quote, "It's a cheap, legal, and easily accessible opioid alternative." No, it isn't! If you have to take 10,000 of them to get high, it's not cheap and it's not easy.
Here's the thing, people love to complain that drugs in the United States are so expensive, which to a certain extent they are, but people fail to realize it's stuff like this why they're so expensive, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, because of all these little rules and this fear of people getting high, I mean, just to buy a bottle of aspirin now can cost you like $50 to $20 now.
Yeah. And it's funny how this report in The Atlantic fearmongers about the number of calls to poison control centers over loperamide exposure. They say it doubled between 2010 and 2015, but they don't give us any actual numbers. I mean, if it were one person in 2010 and 2 in 2015, that would be doubling.
Yep.
They never give us the actual information we need to evaluate these statistics, and that's kind of telling. And the FDA has also issued an alert for doctors to look out for loperamide abuse, because what better things do doctors have to do with their time?
Yeah.
It's not as if they aren't overworked with a bunch of mandated government paperwork already.
Shame, when you posted that video about opioids, there was actually a couple of people that were accusing you of being a drug addict because, you were trying to bring up that, that you're in chronic pain, and they were saying, well, if you're in so much pain that only a really strong opioid can cure you, I think that's a sign you've got an addiction problem.
I'm addicted to not being in pain.
And I tell people all the time, because I know a thing or two about addiction. Addiction happens when you take a drug even though you physically don't need it. It's a psychological problem.
Yeah, and I don't really take all that much. I will take I've got the lowest dose, which is I think the 5-325. That's 5 milligrams of hydrocodone, 325 of acetaminophen. And I break the pills in half, and I'll take one half in the morning, one half in the afternoon. Sometimes I'll need the third half pill. I'm not taking that much. But it's still becoming more and more difficult. And I mean, I've been doing this for over 10 years. I think it's clear I am in no danger of addiction. And yet, I gotta go every 6 months and pee in a cup and stuff like that.
And I still say it is very hypocritical, for people to say you can't take opioids because they're bad for you, but go ahead and smoke and drink all you want.
Well, and it's there's other stuff that's far worse, because I take gabapentin at night for neuropathic pain, because gabapentin, it's actually epilepsy medicine, but it also blocks neuropathic pain. But it takes 12 hours to get out of your system instead of the 6 hours that hydrocodone does, because if I take a hydrocodone at night, I'll wake me up at 4 o'clock in the morning in pain, and the gabapentin keeps me going. But if I take it during the day, I get depression. I mean, not wanting to go and, slit my wrist depression, but just the kind of depression where nothing's worth getting up and making an effort for.
Yeah, you're like Marvin from A Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yeah, it's just no point. I'll just stay in bed. No need to get up and make money and pay bills and stuff like that. Well, and also, acetaminophen. How many people are getting liver damage from acetaminophen?
Yeah, that Tylenol you take for your headache is more dangerous than Imodium.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, even if I'm being completely generous to them and say that, okay, all of this is happening and all of this is just the way you've described and all of this is exactly the problem you say it is, what they're talking about is just going to make it harder for people to get it, and that's just going to drive them to heroin and other harder drugs.
Yeah.
What will they learn?
Yeah. That's why I will never, ever believe a person that says, we need to get the government in healthcare. I say, if we want a medicine to go down and become cheaper, we need to get the government out.
Part 5 is going to be our most serious one by far. So much so that YouTube may decide it won't be allowed. I hope not. It's an important subject that warrants discussion among a wide audience. But if it is, just know that this series is being cross-posted to Odyssey and Rumble, so you can always see it there. Stay tuned.